Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. Today in the co-captain's chair, Sydney Taylor from the Hudson Valley Squares. What's going on, Sydney?
Hey guys, back for another one. Super excited. Thank you, Pete, again for having me, as always.
Oh, yeah. Glad to have you on here. We're going to be seeing a lot of Sydney here on the channel, in addition to on Monday nights. So Sydney and I were talking, and I said, well, I know Sydney likes a lot of the classic rock bands. And I said, well, I have one band that I've been kind of putting off and putting off and putting off. Are you into Bad Company? She says, absolutely. I'm like, perfect. I have my co-captain for this show. And so we're going to rank the albums of Bad Company, both the original lineup as well as the post Paul Rogers lineup with Brian Howe on the vocals. So we're looking at 11 albums. All right. So they have 12 studio albums, but the last thing that they did from a studio album was kind of like a re-recording of old songs and things like that. So we decided not to bother with that one. We're just going to talk about the 11 albums proper of all original material. So I'll have Sydney kick us off with her number 11.
All right, so my number 11, it's funny, I'll precursor this because I was joking with Pete before we started about me picking these albums, and very similar to kind of like the chronological order of the record's releases. And this is going to start right off. So my number 11 is going to be Company of Strangers, which was the record where Robert Hart sang. He was, obviously replaced Brian Howe, who in turn replaced Paul Rogers. And honestly, I just don't have a big tie to this record. I don't think it's terrible. But for me, as you can probably see in my in my answers with the squares and just here on the channel, I'm really big with my original lineups. To me, like I just personally am with certain bands, and I feel like Bad Company is one of those bands where I really love the original lineup so much. And this album just feels a little bit far removed from that, in my opinion. Not terrible, I don't hate it, but it's not a high ranking album for me. So that's going to be my number 11.
Yeah, and I think this album got like really ignored, like big
Yeah.
time, and I'll get to that one in a couple minutes here. I'm going to go with, and I totally agree with everything you said. I think a lot of us tend to favor, the classic lineups and all that kind of stuff. This is an interesting band because you had that classic lineup with that front man who's a
Yeah.
legend. And then they went away for a number of years. They came back. They totally redid the lineup. I mean, Brian Howe, great singer. But, you listen to that latter period Bad Company, it really doesn't sound anything like the early Bad Company at all.
No.
Perfectly tooled for the 80s. And they had a lot of fans, though. The funny thing is, I bet you there were a lot of people who got turned on to Bad Company in the 80s and the early 90s who probably never listened to them back in the 70s.
Yeah, because it's almost a completely, like different sounding band. Like each era, even like that last record that I just talked about, which is number 11, like they have just I feel like just Paul Rogers' voice is so definitive, and when that left, the sound couldn't help but change. You know what I mean? It just
Yeah.
didn't have just what he had brought to the band personally, and so that void had to be filled in some way that made it a little bit different. So
Yeah.
I completely agree with that take.
They basically became Foreigner.
Pretty much, yeah.
So my number 11 is going to be from 1992, Here Comes Trouble. So I'm not a huge fan of this album. It's okay. This is the last with Brian Howe on vocals. To me, it's just kind of bland, unmemorable rock songs, way too many ballads, a couple decent songs. I mean, how about that? Really hook laden. Title track is kind of heavy, if you can call any of this heavy, with a big catchy chorus. Both Feet in the Water, kind of rocking. But like I said, the rest of the album to me just sounds like Foreigner light. And what's really interesting is I think like when Foreigner first got together, when they first debuted on the scene, I think they were big Bad Company fans. And they were kind of like, all right, we're going to do a little more, if you can say, commercial version of Bad Company, because Bad Company was always pretty commercial. But I think Foreigner was basically, we're going to make Bad Company style bluesy rock even more accessible. And look how the roles reversed. Like a few years later, all of a sudden, then Bad Company breaks up at the classic lineup, gets back together, and then they're making music that's almost like Foreigner light. So it's just kind of weird how that all worked out. But yeah, Here Comes Trouble, terrible album cover too. That comes in at number 11 for me. Not a huge fan of that album at all.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's not a super memorable record. That was actually my number 10. So getting right into my number 10. It just, I don't know, we're kind of fading out of that era, of course, with Brian, and yeah, just it wasn't super memorable. It just I don't know, no songs really were like stuck with me and were like super super favorites of mine. So I'd pretty much say that's my number 10, kind of for the exact same reasons. It was
Yeah.
just
Yeah, it
yeah
doesn't really work. And I think what bit of success they had with Holy Water, I think by Here Comes Trouble was kind of like already like kind of waning. But again,
right.
1992, what's happened in 1992? Grunge and
Yeah.
alternative, right?
I
So
had
it's a
that, yeah, I
mix.
had that note that it was the early 90s. So, that I mean, that was pretty much the downfall of every single band. So, trying to navigate those waters and find the way, when you're already, whatever inner workings of the band were happening, it's that time period was a time period where a lot of these bands were kind of bound to have a decline, So,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. My
yeah.
number 10, I'm going to go with the first album with the new lineup after the breakup, which is Fame and Fortune from 1986. So, Brian Howe in the band now, pretty notable singer. Of course, he's, played with Nugent and, great singer. Doesn't sound anything like Paul Rogers. But it's pretty rocking album, I think, for the, in spots. Burn It Up is a good heavy song. Fame and Fortune is decent. Tell It Like It Is, very catchy. But again, much of the album kind of sounds like a Foreigner retread band. From the
Right.
same time period. So right around this time, mid 80s, Foreigner is really, really commercial as well. It's a slick album, lots of synths, a lot of electronic drums and spots. Not terrible by any means. I think they would, this was the first album with this lineup. I think they would get better on the next couple albums. So for me, this is one of the weaker ones of that kind of era, but there's enough on it to recommend. So that's my number 10.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. Our lists are meshing in a weird way,
Yeah.
because Fame and Fortune's my number 9. So we're kind of bouncing a little bit. But kind of touching on that point, it also feels like, obviously Brian had just joined the band. I felt like they were just kind of getting their footing with him joining the band in this record. It was kind of like trying to figure out what this sound like was without Paul, and you know what I mean, like kind of what this lineup meant. I think that they did a lot better on the next record, as you mentioned, with Brian. I mean, I feel like that album's a little bit higher up in my list. So I feel like they kind of got their footing a little bit more with Brian in the next record. But this was kind of like almost felt like a little like test run. It wasn't terrible, you know what I mean? But it was, the first record with Brian, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I remember when that came out. I bought that when it came out. I was like, and this was, 86. So I was like,
Right.
this was like almost like the in between time between like still buying LPs, buying cassettes, CDs right around the corner. I remember buying that on cassette. I was like, well, I'm not really buying much on the vinyl front anymore. I'll buy the cassette. And I remember popping that in. I was like, this ain't Bad Company, right? It was like a couple of the songs were like, all right, this is all right, but
Isn't it?
yeah, I've kind of softened on it over the years, but I remember being pretty disappointed in that in the day. And again, 86, I was listening to a lot of thrash and really heavy
Right.
stuff, but I still love Bad Company, so I was kind of hoping this would be kind of more of the same, and it really wasn't. But
Yeah.
and all right, so my number 9, I'm going to go with Company of Strangers from '95, and there's a reason why I have it a little higher than the other couple. All right, so first of all, I think Robert Hart, pretty good singer, who sounds a lot like Paul Rogers, and I think that's the reason why I like this album a little bit better than the couple that I mentioned already.
Yeah.
He has that Paul Rogers sound to his voice, which I think elevates this album for me a little bit because it sounds a little bit more of what I want to hear from this band. It's not a great album by any means, but it's got a familiar feel to it. I like the title track. Clearwater Highway is a good bluesy rock song, with good guitars. I mean, Mick Ralph's such a tasty player. I love his tone. Gimme Gimme is kind of old school Bad Company, hard rock and boogie, so to speak. You got the blues number, Where I Belong. Pretty Woman's pretty heavy. Dance of the Devil is also pretty rock, and I think it's pretty solid. At least it sounds familiar. It's got that classic Bad Company vibe to it. But man, this album got like completely ignored. In fact, I didn't even know this album ever came out until like maybe like 5 years ago.
This
I was
was like
like,
the late 90s, right? This album came out in
yeah,
the 90s.
95. And
Yeah.
it just kind of sank without a trace. And obviously 95, we know why. But I mean, as a Bad Company fan back in the day, still, I don't even remember ever hearing about this till years later. And it's like, now, listening to it in more recent times, I'm like, well, you know what? they had this, the guy sounded like Paul Rogers. I guess if you're gonna, if anybody's gonna replace Brian Howe and kind of get back to that classic sound, this guy
Yeah.
could have done it. But then after this, what did they do? They put out an album where they re-recorded all the old classics, and I'm like, oh, of course, that was like the kind of the death knell. And they've been back as a touring band with Rogers since, but they haven't released anything new.
Yeah.
So
If they would have kept that going, maybe, I think it was kind of like they put the album out, kind of came out, and then they did nothing else. And so, I mean, of course, mixed with the time, I think maybe just also having one release and nothing afterwards, kind of saying, sunk that lineup a little bit more. But
yeah.
yeah, he definitely is a great singer, and I mean, I still like the album despite it being a little bit lower on my list. But
Yeah.
yeah,
It's not a really memorable album, I think.
yeah,
I think, it's like I said, it's got that kind of Bad Company sound that we kind of crave, but it's not, you're not going to mistake that album for like, the first album or Burning Sky or, any of those classic, Running with the Pack. It's nowhere near that level. But, again, is it any different than Foreigner getting a singer that kind of sounds like Lou Gramm, or Journey getting a singer that sounds like Steve Perry? It's that sort of thing, right? But why have those worked and Bad Company didn't? Again, maybe because it was 1995. If Paul Rogers leaves again, the band decides to continue on, and they bring Robert Hart back again, would they be able to continue? I don't know.
yeah.
Who knows? So anyway, back to you for number 8.
All right, my number 8. Sorry if I'm looking other places. I have a lot of notes and lists, so I feel like I'm like looking away from the camera. But my number 8 is going to be Rough Diamonds, which is the band's last record with Paul Rogers, of course. And there were a lot of things going on when this album was being recorded. First off, their manager, Peter Grant, had to step away from the band during this time. He also was a manager for Led Zeppelin, and of course, John Bonham died, so they had to kind of deal with a lot. So he kind of stepped away from the group. There was also just a lot of inner turmoil happening within the band, lots of disagreements, what happens with a lot of these bands. So I definitely don't think it's their strongest with Paul Rogers by any means. Not a bad record. The first, the title track, Electric Land, was a big single and off of that record, So it's a good album. Definitely not my favorite with Paul Rogers. I feel, that's why it's a little bit lower on my list. And of course, we see a lot of different bands, you're having these inner workings, these disagreements that are happening. Usually they kind of show in the music and what's happening, that chemistry sometimes can be a little bit lost. So that's why I'm going to go with that for my number 8.
So Sydney and I did not compare notes before we did this show, nor did we compare attire or anything like that. It just kind of happened. But yeah, it's Rough Diamonds is also my number 8.
Yeah.
The last with the original lineup. And yeah, it's definitely the weakest of the Paul Rogers era. I absolutely agree. And I agree with everything you said. There are a lot of factors that kind of went into the lacklusterness, I guess, of this album. There's also, I've read stories for a long time about how Paul Rogers and Boz Burrell, the bass player, did not like each other at all.
Yeah, they got like a fist fight or something.
Yeah, they got into a fist fight or about something. It's just like so this band was kind of destined to fall by the wayside at this point. But there are some good tracks on here. Electric Land is a great song. Untie the Knot, I really dig. Painted Face, great song. Could be my favorite song on the album. Kick Down has got some good guitar work on there. Overall, it's just it's a little uninspiring compared to the other albums that came before, but it's got a handful of really strong tracks. If nothing else, Electric Land and Painted Face are well worth hearing the album for, just for those two. But yeah, definitely down on the list from the original lineup.
Yeah, agreed completely. Yeah, so I guess we're gonna dive into number 7. So my number 7 is going to be Dangerous Age, which is the second. One of these days I'm going to stop stuttering. Every single time, I don't know, my mouth just goes faster than my mind. So Dangerous Age. This is the second record with Brian Howe. And I think that in this record, as I mentioned, the first one, they kind of were getting their footing and fame and fortune, and I feel like they got their footing a little bit more in this record than they did in the first. And I think it's funny with this era, I feel like it's a little bit opposite of the Paul Rogers era, where I feel like that era just started out with such a bang. Like it started out so amazing and then declined as the years went on. But with this one, I feel like it took the band a couple albums to really get into the flow, because of course we get into Holy Water a little bit later. But I feel like this album just was kind of still getting their footing, but definitely better than Fame and Fortune. I mean, No Smoke Without a Fire is a great song on this record. Of course, probably the biggest single. Um, I think it's a good album. It's obviously, it was released in '88, so we're kind of, a little bit more commercial than a lot of the Paul Rogers stuff was, obviously, in the '70s. But not the best they did with Brian, but it was better than the first, I think, for sure.
Yep, we're on the same page once again. Dangerous Age, my number 7.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely heavier than Fame and Fortunate. It's not
Yeah.
quite as slick. I love No Smoke Without Fire. I remember, like, when I heard that, I heard that before I actually bought this, because I think they had an MTV video, if I remember correctly. And I was like, whoa, that's kind of what I want to hear. Again, it doesn't really sound like vintage Bad Company, but it's pretty damn rocking for 1988 for these
Right.
guys. One Night, really good. Shake It Up is really good. Title track, I love. I don't know. I just think, again, the parallels between Bad Company and Foreigner right
Yeah.
around this time are like unmistakable. Just, they're so similar sounding, but I guess there was room for the two of them, right? But yeah, definitely Dangerous Age, one of the better ones of that era, I think. And I think, you listen to it today, it holds up fairly well. It's
Yeah.
pretty.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's really funny because I really feel like I didn't have that take before of them really sounding very similar to Foreigner, but now I totally get that vibe. Like they were really on the same wavelength of having that, even like vocally wise, like the whole
It's a
kind of just
similar
tone.
blueprint, right? Yeah, even if they
Yeah,
don't sound exactly
right.
like, there's like, it's just the style is so similar. I mean, they're going for the big hooks, the big choruses,
Yeah.
and I mean, Lou and Brian sound a little bit alike, sort of, I guess, but it's just very good commercial ready
Yeah.
rock geared for like North American audiences,
Which we,
basically.
like, look at that in 1988, and I mean, for that type of band, that's kinda what everybody was doing. I mean, like, aside from, like, you had, like, somebody like, and I know you hate Guns N' Roses, but but you had somebody like Guns N' Roses who was doing something a little bit different at first, but a lot of those bands at that point, it was kind of getting towards the, formulaic period when it came to certain
Yeah.
certain music, so it makes sense that they were kind of leaning towards that, scene and everything. So we're on to number 6, I guess.
Yep.
My number 6 is going to be Holy Water, probably the best record with Brian. They toured actually with Damn Yankees during this time in 1990. So this album got out in front of a ton of people. Of course, it's a title track. If You Needed Somebody, which is probably the most notable song that Brian did with them. Walk Through Fire, Stranger Stranger. There's a bunch of different songs on this record. And honestly, I mean, like I said, it's probably the best of that time, even for 1990. It was still bordering on that cusp of, having a lot of, just getting in front of people, and kind of before grunge came in. Like the a lot of the records that, God, I'm trying to find the words for it, like bordering just on that period of when things changed. And I think that
Yeah.
this album just really was on that border. So I think that it was a great album for the time. Again, probably the best with Brian, and I think there's a lot of memorable songs on this one.
Yep. It's my number 6 as well. So we are just tracking
Yeah.
pretty steady here. Yeah, I mean, this was a platinum album for them, and they toured with Damn Yankees. I saw that tour at the Orange County Speedway in Middletown, and it was a great show. I will say, Damn Yankees blew them off the stage.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, Damn Yankees were great, and Damn Yankees were really hot. But these Bad Company was the headliner, because I mean, this album did really well. The single did really well. But at the time, they not a very energetic band on stage,
Yeah.
whereas Damn Yankees were like on fire. But some real, like, Hal sounds great on this album. It's a very memorable album filled with really great songs. The title track is great. Walk Through Fire, Stranger Stranger, to me kind of sounds like Rocky Mountain Way, right? Bad Company doing Rocky Mountain Way.
Yeah.
You mentioned the hit song If You Needed Somebody, Dead of the Night. Good, catchy, memorable songs. Just enough big riffs from Mick Ralphs, I think. It's the last of the Formula albums, I think, that were still clicking with the general public, because you mentioned it before. Within a year and a half, not many people listening to this type of stuff anymore, unfortunately.
It was just the cusp. Like, I mean, I like, again, I like a lot of the 80s rock and everything. And so like I think of that time period, like Warren and a lot of those bands, they were just, it was like just the end, and they were just getting that little last grasp before everything kind of changed. So I mean, still for that time though, I think that yeah, it was a good record for that year and that time period.
Yeah, but you know what? If they would have released Holy Water, Holy Water, like
Right.
we said, did really well. If they would have released Holy Water 2 years later, I guarantee you it doesn't
Nope.
do nearly the same business.
It would have been like we were talking about Here Comes Trouble. It would have been like that same, I feel like that same kind of reception. Oh man, they're like, if anybody's from Bad Company's watching this, you're like, fuck you guys. So my number 5 is gonna be Burnin' Sky, which again is with Paul Rogers. And the funny thing about this, because I have my Almost Famous vinyl up. So a fun fact about this album is, if you've ever seen the movie Almost Famous, the funny joke, one of the funny things is they basically have this T-shirt, and everyone's out of focus except Russell, who's a guitar player, and they actually based that shirt off of this album cover. So I love this album just for that reason now. But I mean, again, not the strongest, I think, with Paul, but definitely better than Rough Diamonds. There's a couple great songs off this record. Of course, you have the title track. Knapsack's a good record, a good song. You have a couple different tracks. Not my favorite, but I think for Paul Rogers, it was a memorable album. And again, I have to give a little homage to Almost Famous because I love that movie. So
I
yeah,
mean, it goes without saying that Paul sounds great on all these albums.
yes.
When does he ever not sound great? I mean, the guy's a legend. Uh, I never understood, like, what was he thinking? Like, look what he's wearing on this cover. It's just ridiculous. Like, what, would he just come out of like martial arts class or something like that? I don't know. Strange. Anyway, it's also my number 5.
Yeah.
So again, we're tracking right the same here. Title track is terrific. Title track, in fact, it's one of my top songs from Bad Company. I absolutely love it. Morning Sun is great. Leaving You, you got Heartbeat and Peace of Mind, both real bluesy, memorable. Too Bad's pretty heavy. Good guitar work on this. There's a couple throwaway songs on here, for the time. What has it got, a dozen tracks? It's kind of a lot for 1977. But I think there's a handful that are just really, really strong. You mentioned Knapsack is really good too.
Yeah.
So I think it's a solid album. Not one of the better ones from the original lineup, but still there's some classic tunes on here. If you go, I remember before, like when the CD era came, it's like, I had some of these on LP. I had a couple on cassettes, and then I started switching over to CDs, and I went and bought this really good, like, double disc Bad Company compilation. I forget what it was called. People probably watching probably remember it. It was a double disc set, and it had like all these great songs. Like every song on it was absolutely amazing. And you listen to that and you think, oh wow, these guys have such a great catalog.
Right.
But like after their first 2 or 3 albums, their albums are pretty spotty, and there's definitely some filler on some of these albums. But the strong tracks are really strong, like legendary songs.
I
So
think a mistake too on that record that they made was definitely ending the record with like a 7-minute song. I don't know. It was I think it's Master of
Master
Ceremony.
of Ceremony, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really
It's like
brooding and kind of like,
it's
yeah.
like a 7-minute song, and it was just like a weird way to end that album. It was just like 7 minutes, then you're like, okay. And it was just like a very long song to end that record, which I think maybe wasn't the best choice. That's another
Because they're
song that
not Yes and they're not Led Zeppelin, right? Not
yeah,
everybody can do a 7-minute long song. And
yeah,
Bad Company have never been that kind of band. They're like kind of 3-4 minute, good, memorable rock, bluesy
yeah,
rock song. That's what we do,
riffy song, and like 7 minutes is just like, okay. And again, it wasn't that type of band, and I think especially to like end the record was a little bit weird. But other than that, I mean, I completely agree with everything you said. So on to number 4. My number 4 is going to be Desolation Angels, which has the title track, I believe, is Rock and Roll Fantasy, which is personally for me one of the first Bad Company songs I remember hearing. I love that song. Um, One of my favorites, possibly with Paul Rogers. Again, obviously, it's not my favorite because it's not number 1. But one of my favorites. Again, I really do love that title track. I think overall it is a memorable record, and like you mentioned, I think Paul just sounds so great on this. Early in the Morning's a great song. Lonely for Your Love. There's Gone, Gone, Gone. There's just so many different songs in this that I think are really great. And yeah, I mean, Paul Rogers wrote a good chunk of the songs, of course, too. Yeah, I like this album. It's coming in at number 4.
Yep. We've done it again. Number 4 for me. I have a feeling. All right. Well, it'll be interesting to see the top 2. That's
Yeah.
will be interesting. Yeah. I mean, this album sold quite well. In fact, this album sold better than the one that came before it.
Yeah.
But I think that was, again, if we go, well, I know you weren't born yet, Cindy, but I for me, remembering back in those days, if you had a hit single, that just really drove the sales of the album. And Rock and Roll Fantasy was a big hit. So that definitely, I think, catapulted this album beyond the sales of the album that came before it. But there's a lot of good stuff on here. Gone, Gone, Gone is nice and heavy. Evil Wind is really good. Lonely for Your Love, Rhythm Machine. It's like this went double platinum, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But a big seller. Again, there's some filler on here. It's not the kind of the first 3 albums are like really, really solid start to finish. But band's still pumping out some really great tunes on here. And I dig it. I listen to this still quite a bit to this day.
Yeah, it's a great record. I think once we get into like these top 4, it was easy to differentiate, but also a little bit difficult just because I think the first 4 are such strong records.
Yeah.
So yeah, for sure. So we on to number 3 now. Wow, this is going fast. Number 3. My number 3 is going to be Run with the Pack. I'm very curious to see if this is going to be your number 3 too, but don't give it away. Another great record with Paul. Couple great songs on this. Honey Child, Young Blood, bunch of different stuff going on here. The album cover is interesting. It's like very not one of the best. Yeah, if you could just showcase that.
I mean, I love dogs and wolves and everything I do, but I mean, this is just like, come on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't think I ever really like realized how weird that was until I was kind of going through this and like looked at it and I was like, oh, that's kind of a rough album cover.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a memorable album. Again, not my all-time favorite, but enough to be in my top 5. So Run with the Pack is going to be my number 3.
You know what? I'm looking at all these album covers from the classic era. They're all pretty bad.
Yeah, they're not great.
They're all pretty bad. I will say at least the first one has the cool logo,
right?
And straight shooter. I mean, you got the dice. I guess that's okay. But yeah, Run with the Pack is terrible. Desolation Angels is terrible. Burning Sky could be kind of cool, but Paul looks ridiculous on it. And Rough Diamonds is terrible. So yeah, not very good with the album covers there.
No, even like the font on Run with the Pack. Like I'm looking at it now, it's just as like it looks like somebody put it together. Like
it looks like a school kid did it. I mean, like, come on, guys, can't do better than that.
Yeah, not the best.
No surprise, it's my number 3 as well, for all the reasons that Sydney just said. Live for the Music is great.
Yeah.
Really heavy song. Love that. If you don't love Silver, Blue, and Gold, there's something wrong with you.
Are you even a Bad Company fan if you don't, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a wonderful song. I mean, that's Bad Company doing a great pop song. It's so good. The title track is so haunting and memorable. Simple Man is great, bluesy hard rock. Honey Child is great. Mick Ralphs sounds amazing on this album. I mean, he's just a great riffmeister, and he can lay down those tasty blues solos. I always love Mick Ralphs's tone on all these albums. Sweet Little Sister kicks ass. And again, Paul Rogers just sounds spectacular here. I mean, the guy was like one of the best singers of that era, and quite frankly, still sounds great at 70 years old or whatever he is, or close to it. So yeah, it's my number 3. Good, solid album, despite the awful album cover.
Yeah, not the best, not the best. My number 2 is going to be Straight Shooters. Obviously, we just spoke about that album cover. Another one that's not super great, but I mean, great album. As I mentioned, the first couple Bad Company records are just so fantastic. This one has Shooting Star, which is one of my favorite Bad Company songs. Just Paul just sounds so good. I'm such a sucker for vocalists, so he just sounds so great. Of course, Feel Like Making Love, which is one of their biggest hits. And yeah, man, I think that they were really, I mean, the first record is just fantastic, but they were still really in their groove in this record, and stayed in it for quite some time until, we got into those, fifth, sixth record. But yeah, this is just killer kind of classic Bad Company, and my number two.
Well, here's where we separate. So my number, my number two, but I really debated this because I think these first two records are, legendary, right? But I think the debut is my second favorite. I think, it's hard to choose because they both are just jam packed with great songs. This is a classic debut. I mean, talk about right band, right time, right? This was after Led Zeppelin. This was the next big band on the Swan Song stable, and Peter Grant and company pushed these guys to the moon. I mean, it's like, would they have been as popular if they weren't on this label with the backing of the Zeppelin and Peter? I don't know. I think the songs speak for themselves, and I think that they would have done great regardless. But yeah, I mean, Can't Get Enough, amazing. Rock Steady, amazing. Ready for Love, amazing. The title track, arguably one of the best songs they ever did. Moving On is great. Seagull is great. For me, Don't Let Me Down and The Way I Choose, I'm not as nuts about them as the rest of the album. And it's because of those two songs that I rank this lower than what's going to come next for me.
Gotcha.
I mean, the rest of the songs are, drop dead classics. Drop dead classics. And this, probably one of the greatest supergroups of all time that really made some memorable music and did it for a number of years.
Yeah.
And this is your number one.
Yeah, that's my number one. So getting into it. That's my number one. Man, like I said, I was telling people before we started this, I almost felt like my list was kind of just in like chronological order almost, besides a few flip-flops. But man, Bad Company was just one of those bands that I feel like started out so strong. Like right off the bat, it's like such a bang. And unfortunately, I do feel like the quality kind of declined a little bit as the years went on. But for me personally, when I listened to this record, I wasn't a teenager in the 70s, but when I listened to this record, it feels like I was. I don't know. It feels like I would be listening to this record. This came out in God, was it 70?
Oh, this is 74.
74, right? I wasn't sure if it was 74 or 75. This came out in 74, and like I can just imagine like being like a senior in high school, like in 1974, and like playing this in my car or something. I mean, obviously, Can't Get Enough is such a great way to start that record. One of their most classic songs, in my opinion. I love Ready for Love, just like 5 minutes of just like pure perfection. Paul's vocals, just the whole band is just at the top of their game. This whole record is just solid. I think it's just got that classic. When I think of like a perfect like 70s band, like this album is like right up there for me of like just what I think of when I think of that sound and that type of music. So gonna be my number one, the debut.
There you go. Well, I think everybody knows what my number one is. I'm going to go with the album that came out a year later, Straight Shooter. Yeah, for me, it's got some songs on here which are, you hold near and dear to your heart. Deal with the Preacher. So heavy, so good. Wildfire Woman should have been a big hit for them. I don't know why it wasn't. And then you got Shooting Star, Feel Like Making Love, Good Loving God Bad, Call on Me. I mean, it's just some really great songs on here. This is also for me their heaviest album, I think, which resonates with me, like heavy music. Paul sounds great on here. Love the riffs on here. The production is great. It's funny because we're talking about being like of the age when these albums came out and being able to experience these when they came out. So again, I was a little young because in 74 and 75, I was like 8, 9 years old. But I remember like literally like about 2 years later, my cousins who were like a year and maybe 3 years older than me had just started to get into this band. And I remember specifically they lived in Long Island, and I remember going to visit them one summer or something like that. And my cousin's like, oh, you got to check out, we picked up this new album from Bad Company. I don't remember if it was this one or this one they had gotten. It wasn't new at the time. And I remember my uncle like walking into the room saying, oh yeah, that Bad Company band. Oof, that's some pretty scary music. Really, I'm not even sure I should let my daughters listen to them. And I was like, all right. And you listen to them now and you're like, well, what is there to like be worried about with
there was a storm coming, huh?
I guess, right? Because then, the next thing you know, I'm listening to Kiss and all sorts of, Queen and all these other bands. But I guess because a lot of the maybe the song titles could be looked at as suggestive by adults at the time.
Yeah.
Feel Like Making Love, Good Loving Gone Bad. I mean, Deal with the Preacher. What else? Ready for Love. I mean, a lot, a lot of, I guess, sexual
Yeah.
annotations here and there. But I don't know. But this is like pretty safe when you really think about it compared to
Oh
what
yeah.
else was going on. Well, I never understood that. It's always like, and maybe the title of the band, Bad Company.
Oh yeah,
I don't know.
maybe. I don't know. I mean, that's really funny though. I feel like just how much worse it got over the years. You know what
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
mean? Like that's the funny part. But I mean, I think that both of those albums though are so like interchangeable. I mean, like I don't know, kind of like ranking wise, I feel like either one of them could be a top one, and they're both great records
They're
for
both
sure.
great. Yeah. I mean, I would think so. We just went through all 11 albums here.
Yeah.
I would say a great band with a lot of great songs. Not a lot of really great albums, though, I don't think. Like to classify as great. Like I would say, like, these are great.
Yeah.
Me personally. I would say these are very good.
Yeah.
All right. And then everything after it is pretty solid to kind of patchy, right? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, like those, like I said, like they started out so great, and I feel like just as the years went on, it was kind of just like a steady decline, until we got to the last record, and it was just like, yeah,
Yeah.
nobody even realized that they put one out. So it was just like just a steady decline over the years. But I mean, those first two records are right up there with the classics. So
Yeah. This might be one of those bands that for some people, I talked earlier about that double disc like hits collection. For a
yeah,
lot of people, Bad Company is a perfect band for that. I
yeah,
like the hits. The rest of the stuff is okay. I don't need all 11 albums or even half of them. But if I have a greatest hits set, it's all I need to hear by these guys. But then, for me, it's like, all right, but all those songs that are on that greatest hits set, me personally I probably heard them a million times on the radio over the years. So that's why I like listening to stuff like Wildfire Woman and, Deal with the Preacher and then the stuff that was not played on the radio. Cause there's
oh
some
man,
really good Seagull and some of that stuff, right? I mean,
God, I always joke around because I haven't lived in the Hudson Valley as many people know in a hot minute, but you would know WPDH, and man, they will play those songs until that station just doesn't exist anymore. If you could think of a classic rocks, I mean, I love WPDH when I go back to my home of the Hudson Valley, but man, they will play those classic rock songs.
Bad Company, Feel Like Making Love, Can't Get Enough, Rock Steady. What else?
Oh man,
Shooting Star, right? That's basically it, right?
that's basically their rotation. Yeah, no,
Yeah, I
it's
mean, that's all you hear over and over and over and
that
over.
was the first thing I thought of. I was like, oh man, WPDH just plays those songs to death for sure.
Playing the hits, all 30 of them, over and over and over again. That's what we do. No disrespect, Jack George, if you're watching. We know
Yeah,
we love
we
you.
I love WPDH. It's a highlight of when I go back and visit family and friends from where I grew up, but it's just funny.
Yeah. I will say, when I started listening to WPDH in probably the late like 78 or so, from like 78 to like about 84, 85, that was a good radio station.
Yeah.
They played, they played these songs, but they played a lot of deep album cuts. And if any of these bands came out with new albums, they would play songs from the new albums. And
Right.
it was definitely really good, like rock radio, like cutting edge. And then,
Well, I mean, now they found their niche. They have their classic rock. They play the same stuff, and I mean, for maybe somebody who hasn't grown up with PDH for the entirety of their life and have listened to it many times, it might be a little bit different. But yeah, they got into just, I feel like a habit of just like rotating and playing a lot of the same kind
it's
of
not
like
just
Bad
them.
Company. And no, and it's not just them.
There's a
I have radio stations
WPH in
in
every city. I mean,
Oh
that's
yeah, oh yeah. And I mean, I thought it was funny because I know you're a fellow Hudson Valley resident, so I know you would get a kick out of that because you know
yeah,
exactly what I'm talking about.
yeah. But you know what? They keep doing it because there is an
Yeah.
audience who just wants to
Oh
hear
yeah.
those same songs over and over and over again. Like, oh, man, not me. It's just like slit my wrist, slice my throat. I'd rather do something else. So
Oh,
anyway, there you have it, everybody. Ranking the albums of Bad Company from Sydney and myself. Feel free to rank these in the order of your preference in the comments below. Remember, there's no right or wrong answers here. We all hear these albums differently. I have a feeling that a lot of folks are going to be thinking about these very similar to the way we have, but we'll see.
yeah.
Sydney and I were pretty much almost on point throughout the entire list, but rank your top 5, your top 10, the whole shebang, whatever you want to do. And visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. You can also see Sydney at
www.metalfromtheinside.com. And I just want to thank everybody really quick for sending me messages and stuff. I've gotten a lot of different people checking out the podcast from here. So of course I have to thank Pete for allowing me to join him here on the channel and, be able to mention what I do otherwise. So I appreciate anybody who has come and listened to the podcast. I have Michael Schenker on this Friday. So if you love Michael Schenker and UFO and all that fun stuff, stay tuned. It's coming this Friday, and you can find me pretty much anywhere where you get your podcasts or at www.metalfromtheinside.com. So check it out.
Awesome. Yeah, it was. I can't wait to hear the Schenker one. I love the Joe Lantern, and that was great.
Thank you.
Very cool. So there you have it, everybody. So stay tuned. Sydney and I are coming right back. We're going to talk about our 10 favorite songs from U.S. hard rock veterans, Mr. Big. So that's coming up next. We'll see you then. For Sydney Taylor, I am Pete Pardo. Ciao, everybody.
See ya.